Recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you all for being here. I want to talk about what lowers costs for Americans and how to build that infrastructure that does so, because we keep hearing that the Build Back Better plan and the infrastructure plan that was passed will lower costs for Americans. This is repeated so often that it supposedly becomes self-evident. We have to ask how, because this argument is based on the notion that spending more federal money actually makes these projects easier to execute. Somebody has to ask, is that actually true? Now, you could argue that better infrastructure certainly lowers costs, but the infrastructure has to be built. It actually has to happen. And as Americans are experiencing the highest costs of electricity in the last 20 years, I want to know how the Build Back Better agenda will actually reduce costs, not just by spending money, but by making projects easier to complete. Mr. Hergott, we'll start with you, please, and thank you for being here. During your time at the permitting office, what did you find was the single largest threat to getting a project completed?
Well, thank you for that question, Mr. Crenshaw. I think that there's a bit of a disconnect between the world that everyone wants to live in and the one that we actually live in. And the one that I live in, and in the Trump administration in particular, and although it was little known, we pushed some of the largest wind and solar projects in the history of our country, right? And some of the largest in the world, even though it got me in a bit of trouble. But the reality is that it takes 7 to 10 years for a project that starts today. What do we do in that 10-year period, especially now that we have supply chain issues that we can't actually address? So at the same time that we're talking about demand and supply issues and a recognition of where that might increase prices, at some point, if you're going to you can't throw good money after bad. At some point, we have to have a roadmap, whether it's wind, solar, transmission. My entity is agnostic. But the bottom line is, if people are putting capital at risk on whatever energy source that comports with the stated national policy and the changing priorities of the whims of elections, we have to remove this, because those 20 to 30% of costs are things that we have to solve, and that are not going to solve themselves. And apparently nobody wants to talk about it in a real way. And those kinds of costs are the ones that are borne on utility bills. And those are the things that I haven't seen addressed by either side, either in the draft versions of the infrastructure bill or in the current Build Back Better plan. Creating a new office within an agency doesn't solve a problem. All right, calling something shovel ready without making it shovel ready doesn't do anything for the American people.
Right, and that does get to a question I was going to ask about the claim that the infrastructure bill took care of these process issues, but you're saying it does not.
Well, while I was in the administration, I drafted something called One Federal Decision, in a recognition that we needed to bring this disparate universe of decision makers and have one adult in the room that would actually drive the process. No shortcuts to the environmental reviews, but that there would actually be not necessarily yes, but a decision given in a reasonable amount of time. One Federal Decision was codified in the most recently passed bill, but that's only for DOT projects. The Federal Permitting Council, of which I ran, which is an extremely successful tool, and Christina Rada, who currently runs it, is exceptional at her job. Problem is that only has 8 projects, 6 wind and 1 transmission, and it's only for projects that are $200 million and above. Those are very targeted, narrow tools. What do you do with the other 2,000 projects that are stated to meet the 2030 climate goals that are sitting in a period of limbo with no one giving them a hand? And those are both our faults.
Last thing I want you to talk about is how our court system is weaponized, and what we could do to streamline the process, which would avoid that.
So thank you for that question. There's currently about 1,200 cases that are a direct contributor to a renewable energy future that are currently in active stages of litigation. Whether that was the most recent rescission of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act that makes it now a criminal penalty to have an incidental take of even one bird, has paralyzed offshore wind development and wind development in Nevada. And solar is the same issue, as being impacted by new changes to the sage grouse. Not even just the NEPA rules that everyone talks about. It's the 60 other permits that are required here that have now created an uncertain regulatory landscape, because project developers have to get everything right. Those that don't want the project only have to get one thing wrong that was a process foul, and they can hold up a project for about 2 years, which oftentimes lead about 30% of the time to project abandonment. And at that case, if we don't solve this issue, we're going to continue to have litigation and have courts making science-based decisions, adjudicating things that should be solved either by Congress or by the scientists in the agencies that make these risk-based decisions.
We could talk about that for a lot longer, and we have, you and I, but I'm out of time, so I yield back. Thank you.